Recording. All right, so obviously we're going to talk about Spotlight today. I want to talk about the development, some of the features, and some favorite outputs, and then also just keep the floor open for questions at any point. So, during the show, at any point, if you want to go into my channel and ask a question, I'll try to answer it. And then I think towards the end, kind of more open, whatever you guys want to. So yeah, all right. So I think starting out with the development, I know I mentioned it before in the description. I mean, this whole project kind of started after seeing light pass through glass, and it was actually this picture that I took that like kind of gave me the inspiration to start really looking into. I think at first I tried mimicking it with particles and gravity, so I created this image, which is actually just light, or not light, but particles coming in, and there's some points of gravity, and they flung around gravity point. Kind of looked like light rays coming in. But then I'm like, this wasn't really working too well, so I started playing with actual two things: reflection and refraction. So reflection being light spawning in the center and bouncing off of all the edges. So this is the first time playing with that. See, all the light starts here and slowly makes their way out into outskirts of these little cool little details over here and stuff. So that's reflection, and then the next step was to learn refraction, light passing through a line and then distorting as it goes through. So right here, I think this is the first time I got it working correctly, where all the light starts right here, and then as it goes through, you can see it kind of changes to be like sort of, if you imagine this is a straight line, it becomes 90 degrees. That's kind of the basic idea of refraction. And then you kind of vary that with how strong the refraction is. So how close is it going to come to that angle, or is it only? But so that's the effect of refraction, and then cycle through these. You can see how eventually I got to the point where started layering shapes, getting these interesting effects, and adding some color. And you can see kind of like this was like that early formation of the idea of layering shapes and getting these different gradients inside. A good representation of how I was leading up to where I eventually got. And then so originally this project was actually supposed to be kind of like gemstone, instead of this idea of abstract overlapping shapes. So a little bit further, you could see like this is that real idea of like, oh, these are little gemstones on the ground. You have light coming in the side, and kind of creating these little cascades coming off the back of the shapes, changing the color of the sea. Eventually, playing a little bit more abstractly with the refraction. Actually, I still really like this effect. That I might come back to another point. Eventually, got down to the point where I had the color coming in. That's what evolved into Spotlight. So kind of just to give some background about how the project came to be, but also I think specifically because it'll help with talking about the traits in a little bit, talking about reflection versus refraction. All right, so let's dive into Spotlight specifically. I think I'll start with some of the traits, because I think like some of the traits on Spotlight are really very obvious, like the color palettes and the forms and that sort of thing. But one of the things that I really wanted to talk about was these three traits here: diffusion, reflection, and refraction, because I think they're a little bit less obvious to kind of notice because they all depend on each other. Um, so if reflection is really strong, you're not going to notice a lot of the refraction, and vice versa as well. Let's see. diffusion first. I think the most obvious. So diffusion is going to decide how the light moves randomly after it spawns. So this would be with strong diffusion. You could see that the very quickly it kind of becomes blurred, and so this is more of like a either a spray paint effect or like a light in the fog kind of style. But everything blurs out very quickly. And then on the other end of the spectrum, which would be diffusion. Actually, sorry, that was diffusion selenite, and then diamond is opposite end. Doesn't So you have these really defined long light ray lines. And as far as naming these traits for diffusion, I actually kind of wanted to hint back to that original idea I had of the project being about gemstones and these different kinds of gemstones that have different levels of clarity. So when the light passes through, you know how clearly it's going to come out on the other side. So a polished diamond is going to have really good uh, um, or very clear surfaces, whereas like selenite is this really foggy looking stone. Silicate being more like a glass, and then finally quartz being a mix. There's that because like quartz can it has a lot of variation in quartz, where sometimes it's very clear, sometimes it's not. So you can see like this shape here, you have a lot of diffusion where it gets really blurry versus this shape where there's not much at all coming. So this trait is actually all three of these traits, diffusion, reflection, and refraction, are tied to the actual shapes on the screen. Yeah, okay, so that's diffusion. More of these just showed off. I think here is another version of strong diffusion, so selenite. I don't know. I really like how it's a lot more. I like to think of it like misty, like light in a misty air, kind of blurry vibe. And again, the strong or the weak diffusion, where it's more of a diamond, get these really defined. About reflection. So there are two styles of reflection that are going to be really obvious, which is reflection inside. So this trait, it basically, you have the shape and it has obviously inside area and outside area. So when the light hits the shape, it says, okay, am I inside or am I outside of the shape? If the light spawns here, comes over and hits this edge, it's going to bounce back inside. Versus if it spawns outside and it's just going to pass right through. So basically, light gets trapped inside of these shapes and has a couple of different effects. So one being, if the shapes are spaced apart and not overlapping, it's going to have really just the shapes filling in. And then when they do overlap, you kind of this paper cutout effect, I think is really neat, where the light gets trapped in these kind of dense areas, the shapes over. And then the opposite being outside, where light will always bounce off outside of the shape if it spawns on the outside, or if it's on the inside, it will pass. Kind of cutout effects. And I like to call these like the Swiss cheese outputs, because you have all this like weird shaped cutouts and some of those kind of emergent shapes that come from shapes. Yeah, and then so the other traits for reflection are going to have balanced, always, and so balanced being when the light hits side of a shape, it has a 50% chance of bouncing off or passing. That's going to be the most common trait as well, and I think it really gives like I don't know, it's my favorite style because you get that perfect blend of um, color blending, but also having a little hint of that like good direction of flow where you can see how the light is passing. Then always reflection always going to be probably the most chaotic looking outputs. I don't know those in here. Yeah, I mean this would be reflection always, so you can see it's kind of hard to tell what way the light is traveling, especially if it spawns sort of randomly. You're going to have kind of random bounces. Next one would be refraction. This is a great example of refraction being very strong and reflection being. So when I said earlier that these traits are a little bit more difficult to point out by themselves, is because, like in this case, refraction is strong, but sometimes it can be difficult to see it, especially if there's a lot of diffusion going on, or if there's a lot of reflection going on too. If I do refraction strong and diffusion, in this case, you can still see, especially right off the edge of the shapes. You still get those defined areas, but it quickly blurs out. So it'd be hard to point out. But in this case, I think we have diamond fusion along with strong refractions. Very well defined. And the other two sort of interesting refraction rates are inside and out. So this is where refraction is going to be very strong when it's coming into the shape or going out of the shape, and then very weak when you see here, like these lines of refraction are coming in. See this kind of directional movement versus on the outside a little bit more, and then the opposite of the light coming out is very well defined. Inside where it's more blue. I think I want to just move on to one of my favorite men. Those are the main things I want. Traits. I think one more thing would be the coloring, stark versus soft. So all right, so coloring soft versus stark. So this would be an example of coloring soft, where all right, so if I lay a bunch of shapes on the screen, and I have a set palette of, let's say, 5 colors. So each shape gets their own color, but if I only have 5 colors and there's 15 shapes, you're going to get some repeat. So with coloring soft, I actually extend the palette so that there is only each shape has its own unique color. So you're going to get either this gradient effect, or actually, it's really obvious in where there's this is the quantity disco. So you a whole bunch of you can really see that gradient. Versus the other option or the other effect from this would just be these really, really soft outputs where all the color really blends into each other. It's kind of hard to see the different shapes. And so it's less of a gradient and more of just this really, really soft blended together output. Same with really muted colors. So it's kind of a nice break from the more stark puts when you have coloring stark. So you're going to have these and each transition from one shape to very contrast. Yeah, so like here you can see Pyra is one of the color palettes that has the least amount of colors. See a lot of these versus maybe not, but this one is I really like this one because you have so many shapes that are overlapping, and from that you get all these different areas of new shapes that come out, but also every space feels like its own gradient. Um, Zoom in and see like really get these brand new colors that come from a color palette. This one is especially cool too. I think this is a good example of why like added in the save function. When you're watching these render live, you can kind of decide when to capture a frame. In this case, you could let this one render a lot more, but I really like it with the white space. Really highlight some of this movement. And with that being said, too, talking about the live render, I think it's I don't know, it's kind of strange to look at all of the mints as these final renders because I feel like it's missing that initial development. Watching it render live and seeing the shapes kind of pop onto the screen. That's part of the reason why I chose the name Spotlight. You know, this is there's two reasons. So the whole artwork is made of small circles or little spots, and then also a spotlight kind of reveals things that are unseen in the same way that you have all these hidden shapes on the screen reveal themselves as you watch it. I think it's interesting too, especially with the when you're looking at some of the other spawning methods. So this would be source, the different sources. So flood is going to be most common, and this is where light just spawns all over the page. And then you have heliopause, where light's actually going to spawn either all on the top, on the left side of the screen, down. Get this kind of cascading development. I think that's a lot of fun to watch. Really get that movement of the light. And one thing that's cool, I think, about watching these in live as well, starts off as this visually dynamic artwork where you can physically see all of the light moving through the scene. You really get a sense of that movement. And then over time, as it fills up, you stop seeing this very like obvious movement of light, and it becomes a lot more subtle. So especially like in these areas, like they just kind of subtly fill in, but you don't really lose that movement because it gets captured by the light rays that start defining them. And of course, it's going to vary from mint to mint. If you have that strong diffusion, you're not going to see that movement as well in the end. But it's a different effect. Like this is going to have a lot of strong fusion in it. Still kind of tell, where that light is moving. This one is source radiate. So all the light is spawning at randomly in the centers of the shapes on the screen. I think it's in some of them it's kind of difficult to tell. Like when you have these bigger shapes, so the center of this is going to be over here. But if you have one where you have a lot of small shapes, very clear. Okay, light spawning right here. On one to one. This one is another one of my favorites. All the light spawning in the center of the source origin. And it kind of neat how since it really does spawn right in the center, all of that light got kind of caught in this differential growth blob right there. Nice great time these areas on fill in, but you gotta sit and watch it for a bit to really see them. And then okay, so this is actually an interesting thing with source origin. So if you have source origin and you have, I believe it's reflection always, what actually happens is the center of the screen gets cut out in this rectangular shape. And that was originally put in place to avoid all the light just being captured in one shape and not filling up the screen at all. But I think it actually had this really neat side effect of creating this. I like to call these like the cord or the hallway, where you get this kind of hallway or tower of overlapping shapes. Really difficult to see like what shapes are causing or what shapes are really there because they're you're only capturing this one little bit where they're trapped in the center. There's another one like that. think only like two of them came out like that. So this is 359, and you get that kind of effect too. A little bit more open because the shape spread out and uh, not overlapping as much. But and this one being 144, I think it really that that effect final render. And then the second to last source is Rift, or actually maybe second to last, where all the light spawns along the diagonal screen. I really enjoy this one because I think it's a lot of fun to watch, and it does create kind of like this spline of light. I think obviously but I think with quickly get like this corner is going to fill in, you're going to have and same. And then finally, source absorb. So all the light spawns along all four edges, and if all these shapes are kind of absorbing the light. Interesting one to watch. Of course, these are mainly this trait of source is really gonna be most obvious when you're watching it, but they also do affect the kind of rendered image, especially with heliopause. Notice one side of the screen is going to be a little darker than the others. I think great by first starting out having all the light spawn in the side here, almost like a door opening in a dark room, casting all these shadows on. Good blobs. Okay, so differential growth is probably like one of my favorite things in generative art. I started playing with it a few years ago or a year ago or something. I remember, but it's just something that I've always found to be really pleasing to look at. So the way differential growth works is you basically start with a string of like let's say like a circle, and it's made up of a bunch of points. You add every frame, you add more points to that circle, but these points want to be close to their direct neighbors. They want to stay attached to each other. They also want to push away from other neighbors, and so you naturally get these like kind of continuous curves that develop as the shape grows out and tries to fill the space, but also avoid its other neighbors. I think just there's something about like how natural they look, and I don't know. I've always found them to be really satisfying. I was really excited to be able to add this into the project, especially because it really just fit in so well. I mean, I think um with yeah, here we go. With the differential growth blobs, you get a lot of these sharp curves that are going to concentrate light to these points. And I think this was one of the effects that I was originally trying to capture. I think differential growth in this project does the best of really making those, defined light cascades that you would see if you saw like a textured glass cup on the table, light passing. Um, back to the yeah. So this guy is fantastic block. It's just a great shape, and I really like it in there. And then this whole output too is just a lot of fun. It's well balanced. I really like the to be form overgrowth, where it's a mix of uh, geometric like polygons and the differential growth blobs. I think it's a great balance of these really flowy, curvy shapes, like well defined hard edge geometry. Another great blob where you can see like a thumbs up. And this is another one too where the reflection is kind of neat cookie cutter effect of the certain areas getting a lot more filled than others and cut out shape. Um. Oh, and oh yeah. Speaking of uh overgrowth rate. There are some outputs of that style where there is one shape that's really defined in the center and it's like a straight edge geometric shape. And I think those make really interesting because you have it's almost like a frame. You know, this center triangle is sort of framing out a little spot in the center where it's overlapping all of these different growth blobs. Um, really stands out. I love they're really cool. Pentagon center. It adds a little bit of balance to otherwise like chaotic, flowy blobs. I think that's pretty much like all I had kind of planned. I mean, there's a lot more, these outputs that I could kind of go through that I like about. But I mean, if there's any questions anyone has specifically about the project, I mean, feel free to, put a message in the chat. I think you should be able to unmute yourself too if you want to ask it directly in the discussion. But I kind of want to leave this a little bit more casual and open to other people to talk as well. But otherwise, I will just going through. I think this is actually one of the traits that I didn't mention before. The fading trait. Most of the outputs are going to have the uh, sort of highlights and shadows you're going to see along the edges. So when the light passes outside of the shape, it's going to be darkened for a little bit. And then when it initially comes, get this artificial 3D effect where the shapes seem to be kind of lifted off the ground and have three-dimensional depth. You can see how it's darker around. In some cases too, especially with this palette, I'm not entirely sure why. This is the Winter Dusk palette, and the highlights are just very strong on it compared to some of the other palettes for whatever reason. Where you can really see this like white, almost white lines coming into it. But when you remove the shading effect, which is with false, you get these much more flat images. And again, these are a lot more like the original idea of the project, where I was like really just blending the light together without having this kind of 3D effect, um, and just focusing on the gradients. So this one I think is really interesting, where you have so many shapes overlapping, and get all these areas of gradients without that shaded effect. So it's obviously a lot more flat, but I don't know, it creates like a much more or a very unique output compared to some of the other ones. That's kind of it. uh, this one voids has voids true in it, so you get basically random parts of the shapes are going to be cut off, so they kind of fade into the screen. I like this one a lot for the fact that like this guy here gets cut off right in the middle, but he just pops out. And with uh, voids, you're going to get a lot of this empty space where the light is left each of the shapes and blend together out in the open onto the screens of this. One other thing too that I want to talk about, I know I've mentioned a whole bunch, is it's really worth it to render the extra high resolution so that you can zoom in and and see all these individual circles. I don't know how well this is coming through on the screen, but it's really neat to zoom in real close and just kind of pan around and find some areas that you like. Same thing with watching them render. Get them uh, render live in a really large screen where it kind of cuts off the just kind of watch it develop in, kind of zoomed in where you can see spot up. I think that's an interesting way to view the artwork. I'd like to get page set up where this is automated. Go in, pull up your mint, have it render in resolution. It could be a little bit difficult to do on your own. Just through the library. That's something that I'm working a bit easier. Yeah.
Hey Josh, I have a
Oh yeah, go ahead.
oh, I just had a question. Are you going to be offering prints for these? I think you might
Yeah,
have mentioned something.
yeah. So I have I actually just put in the print order for a test print actually of the one I printed. Uh, okay. I'm gonna be printing this one. So I'm waiting to get that back, and once I check that out, make sure it looks good, and make sure the dimensions are all good, I'll probably open that up and share some more details about that.
I like that orange piece in there,
Yeah.
just below it. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
it. Looks like a little hand, like a baby hand.
Yeah, another great blob in there. I really enjoy the this palette. This is the secondary palette, especially with the purple. A great purple in there. A lot of fun stuff going on. But this is actually when I had my dad pick one out that he wanted to get printed. I picked this one, so I'm gonna do that for the test print. Yeah, that's kind of all I got for planned topics, I guess. If there's any questions, feel free. Wrap this up.
Thanks for putting this together. This is a real treat for people who are here, and I know that you're recording it, so I'm really glad that people who aren't able to tune in right now can check it out later on.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean this channel I think is nice to have open for people to kind of come in and talk about their projects, and a little rough around the edges at first I think, but I don't know, it's yeah, just trying to figure it out and the best way to do it. So I think it's just nice to be able to break down the project a bit more after the fact when you've had some time to take it in a little bit more and relax after the stress of the drop, and yeah, there's some other thoughts on the project. Another great one where the fades get these really abstract forms on the screen, and a lot of interesting blending going on, and really love this part here. For whatever reason, the light just decided to go in this very straight line. A lot of fun. Yeah, that's all I got for now. I think if I wrap this up, yeah.
Sounds great. Thank you again.
All right, thanks. Appreciate all you guys tuning in, and I'll talk to you later.